Okay, I can't believe it, but this is actually happening. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and I am coming to you from my father-in-law's wood shop in North Garden, Virginia. I am here for the holiday, and I've just barely stolen away to bring this week's talk with Neil Pearson to you. I'll say more about that in just a bit, but I'm wondering how your holiday was. Did you spend time with family like I am? Did you talk any politics? We did, but we managed to do it without anything bad happening. Hopefully, it is the same for you. And also, let me not forget, anyone who was with me last week might be wondering, I don't want to leave any more suspense. I'm very happy to report that Goldie the goldfish did not die. Goldie did not die. But here's the deal. I might not be totally out of the woods yet, you see. Last week when I recorded the intro for you, I was really not sure whether, when I woke up the next morning, whether Goldie was going to still be with us. And I woke up the next morning and she was. In fact, she seemed to be doing a lot better. And I felt encouraged, and I did more research, and I took more measures, actually redid her tank water, and then there was several more days, and she seemed to be progressively getting better each day. Her eyes were like still kind of bulgy, but they were less white, and she definitely was eating again, and she was definitely swimming around a lot more and like being more active, and she definitely seemed like she was getting better. Then I just left a couple of days ago, 2 days ago, to come here for the holiday, and I'm going back tomorrow, so it'll be like 4 days that I was away. I have the automatic feeder for her. So, I guess we could not be totally out of the weeds, but I really felt encouraged and confident. I will report again just to make sure next week. I'll let you know, but for anybody who was wondering, I'm happy to say Goldie made it through at least that initial scare. So hopefully she's continuing to heal, and we will find out tomorrow, and then I'll let you know next week. Anyways, other than that, like I said, I'm wondering how your holiday was. I had a good holiday up here. It's been kind of weird. I've been feeling really off-kilter for a couple of reasons. Mainly, I think my eldest daughter, when she got here a few days before me. She went and got a haircut. She got like a professional haircut. And she hasn't gotten a haircut in a really long time. Her hair is really long. And they just, they took some off and layered it some. And suddenly it seemed like she was several years older. And I think she feels older looking at herself in the mirror with her new haircut. And I was just watching her last night at the dinner table. And she was doing her best to impress her grandpa with her ability to make adult conversation. And she was doing a darn good job of it. And I was freaking out a little bit. I was like, oh my God, wow. Maybe there's other parents listening to this who can relate to that strange feeling of your children suddenly starting to not seem as much like children. And just the passage of time, and I must admit, like some worry. I have worry, am I going to be able to provide? And, all that stuff that creeps in. But more than anything, I'm just filled with a lot of love for her. That's why I get fearful, because I love her so much, and I want to be a good dad, and sometimes I worry. These days I feel like I'm mostly just telling her no. I'm saying no to her all the time. It seems like I'm exaggerating, but I digress. I do hope that your holiday is filled with some connection, some family, some love, maybe. I don't know. Speaking of providing for, I want to say something to you about the new podcast premium service. You might have noticed that we rolled that out a little bit kind of on the down low over the last few weeks. We did that partly just to make sure everything was working, like kind of beta test it. But now everything's up and running, and I wanted to say something about it because I've always been very transparent with all of you about the process of this show, and I want to be very transparent with you about what we're doing and why. So I started this show 4 years ago. August will mark 4 years exactly. And I remember for the first 6 months, I did 1 episode a month. And then I moved to 2 episodes a month. And then sort of soon after went to 3 episodes a month. So that was over a period of a year and a half it built. And then 2.5 years ago, I moved to weekly episodes. And we have not missed a single week since then. And I feel very good about that. If something I said to Josh at the beginning, I said, I'm going to be consistent. If we do this, if we add more episodes, I'm only doing it if we can really be consistent and keep it going and not miss any, because I felt like it was like a practice and you got to be steady and consistent. And I feel good that we have done that. We have not missed a week in 2.5 years. After that first year of weekly episodes, though, there definitely became this dilemma where I was putting a lot of time and energy into making the show. And at a certain point, it started to feel very hard to justify, frankly, to my wife. Like, I'm putting all this time and effort into it, and I don't make any money off it, just like a passion project. And I'm telling her, but, people are listening to it, and I think it's going to help me in other ways, but, in the tangible, immediate way of like, hey, we got to pay for your daughter's preschool, and then me talking about influence doesn't pay the mortgage, So at that point, we decided to start looking for sponsors and ads because that was a way to get some money for the show to support it. And we've really been selective. We really only have sponsors that make sense with the show. We did try a few. Remember, I did the one with the jewelry company, and they were very cool, very indie. I really got behind it. But at a certain point, it became clear that, not all sponsors or all ads really make sense with this show. And I'm not going to put them in the middle of the conversations. Sometimes they have like the insertions in the middle. Like, I'm never going to do that, And so this greatly limits, what kind of funds we can generate through ads and sponsors. But thanks be for our sponsors, because without the sponsors that we have had and do have right now, we just really wouldn't be able to be doing what we're doing. However, when I'm looking at the show going forward and trying to make this a sustainable thing, because I want to keep doing it. I genuinely love doing these conversations, and I'm going to do everything in my power to just keep it going because I'm continuing to learn. I feel that people who are listening are getting a lot from them, and I do feel very good about the contribution it is and the work I'm doing. So I'm determined to make it viable, to make it something that can be more sustainable going forward. And I'm certainly not the only person who's facing this. This is just something across all of podcasting right now. People trying to figure out a way to make podcasting financially viable for the people who are making them. Often people like me who are just doing it on their own out of their passion, And so there's really only 2 other options outside of doing ads and sponsors. You either do listener support, like a Patreon page, or you remember I used to ask for donations all the time, but when we started doing the ads and sponsors, I stopped asking for the donations because I didn't really want to ask for money. I hate begging for money. And when I looked at Patreon, it really turned me off. Trying to figure out, how I'm going to release stuff earlier to Patreon or what the tiers are and just dealing with somebody else's portal. The whole thing turned me off. So I never wanted to do the Patreon thing. And other than listener support, the other thing that people are doing is a premium service where you have a portion of your feed that is always free and accessible, but you take the archive and you turn it into a premium service. And that's what we've done. The most recent 52 episodes are always going to be available. That's a little bit more than a year's worth. So if you've been listening from the beginning and you're totally caught up, nothing changes at all. But we are doing something different because we're not just creating a premium service like the other ones. We created a premium service with a very specific pricing structure. It's a choose your own rate, cancel anytime, $5, $10, or $15 a month subscription. Or if you truly can't afford it, you can email us and we'll give you a free account. And so we are asking people to value the show and to show that value with some dollars. Not a lot of dollars, though. I mean, I think about the things that I spend money on, like a $5 freaking chai latte or whatever. And what's more valuable to me, the chai latte at fucking Starbucks or this thing that I listen to every week that really feeds my mind? And so, again, not just me, this is across all podcasting, but we wanted to find a way to provide an actual service. The full archives of the show, there's so much amazing stuff there. It really is a continuing education for anybody who's interested in a deeper yoga inquiry. But also a way to offer those of you who are listening, who appreciate this show, a way to really be a part of its sustainable future. And however many of you out there are willing to do this will make a difference. It'll make a difference. I really do want to encourage you to become a subscriber. It would really be a profound help to me, and I would be grateful to you. You can find out everything you need to know about it at jbrownyoga.com/premium. Okay, let me tell you about today's talk with Neil Pearson. I don't know if you remember, Neil has been on the show before. It was quite a ways back, 3 years ago. And Neil was the very first person I had on who I started asking questions about pain science. And I've had many more people on. This is an ongoing conversation for me about the postural, structural, biomechanical model and the biopsychosocial model and some of the science that's being discovered around pain and how to manage pain. Well, Neil was the first guy I ever talked to about it, and I was very intimidated. I remember I was so nervous, I didn't think I could have a conversation with him. I expressed this to him at the beginning of this conversation. But I have learned a lot since, and it was so wonderful to reconnect with him. I really feel like it's a nuanced conversation that really goes to this biopsychosocial thing. And he's just doing fantastic work. He's got a new book coming out on integrating yoga and science in pain care. It features a list of fantastic authors, Shelley Pascoe, Matthew Taylor, and others. And it's a fantastic book. I have read it, and I do encourage everybody to check it out. There'll be a link and all in the description. But it was so good to reconnect with Neil, and I really feel like it adds to this ongoing conversation that we've been having. So I'm very excited for you to hear it today. Before we do, let me mention one of these sponsors who has really been by us since the beginning. In fact, this was our first sponsor and our most, I would say, honored and esteemed for that reason sponsor, Karmasoft. Karmasoft is an online studio management software. It's what I used when I had my studio in Brooklyn. And the owner, Rudy Senegal, is a friend of mine. I've known him for a lot of years. We became friends while I was using his product in my yoga center, and I just came to really respect him and how he runs his business. He's been on the show before, and we talked all about that. And really, I just think it's better. I think it's better than Mind Body Online. I think it's more efficient. And I think if you have to do the work of scheduling classes and accounting and running payroll and all that, you really do need something to help you do that. And you can try with spreadsheets. I did with spreadsheets for a while, but Karmasoft really made my life profoundly easier. And Rudy is somebody you can really relate to as a person, not as a corporation. And I really feel good about encouraging you to go check it out. Go to karmasoftonline.com. All right, other than that, I just got a couple of gigs coming up that you might want to come hang out in person with me at. I'm going to be at the Lehigh Valley Yoga Festival, July 13th, this coming weekend. Then I'm going to be in Japan later this month, July 19th through 28th. If you happen to be in that part of the world, you can find out about those gigs and more, and all of my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. All right, then. I think that will do. I will touch base with you on the other side and let you know about who's coming on next week. But for now, let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Neil Pearson.
Ooh, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. How you doing?
Hey, Neil. What's
going on in your world?
Not too much.
No? Oh, you're lucky.
Well, I mean, I was being casual at the beginning of a conversation, you know. On this day, in this moment, there's not that much going on.
Yeah, I get you.
But it's great to talk to you again. Do you know how long it's been since we last spoke?
No. How long?
It has been quite a while. 3 years.
Wow. Man.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Time sure flies.
And, you know, you came on the podcast back very early on. I believe it was episode 22. And now we are recording, I believe it's episode 167.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. And what's great for me, Neil, is that you were really the first person I ever had on who I tried to broach the subject of pain science with.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
And honestly, it's one of the episodes when I listen back to it, it's a little bit cringy for me, like some of the early episodes for me personally, because I just didn't know a lot. And I felt like I was a little intimidated to try to even talk about it. And I think we did an okay job. I love the episodes, for the early episodes, just for their history and nostalgia. But since we've spoken, I've learned a lot more, and I've talked to a lot more people. I've had Shelley on a bunch of times. I had Matthew Taylor on, who's a contributor to your new book. Just a few weeks ago, I had Greg Lehman on.
Oh, great.
And so we talked about nociception. So I've been learning more. And I've also had a bunch of other people on, like Peter Blackaby and Bernie Clark. And it's sort of been this ongoing conversation. And for me, I'm often framing it in this way that has to, sort of like the postural structural model and then this biopsychosocial model.
Right.
And I think that sometimes I've gotten it a little bit confused. And part of what I thought you and I could clarify some today is I think sometimes I've associated the postural structural biomechanical model of looking at the body with a kind of mechanistic dualistic view. And one of the things that Greg Lehman pointed out, a couple of things. One, he said that he started studying a long time ago, and there was always biomechanists who were questioning things. There was always threads of people who were questioning the conventional idea. But he also sort of suggested to me that it's not that biomechanics means a mechanistic view necessarily of the person, that it's the way we're looking at biomechanics more than biomechanics in and of themselves. So I guess where I'm going is that, I do still feel like there's this predominant viewpoint about our bodies. Right. And I believe Matthew Taylor wrote it as like a bad parts fix it model.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's
from the book I wrote. I wrote a note. I saw that Matthew called it that bad part / fix it model.
Right.
And I remember kind of you telling me about that in your early training, like what's generally being taught is not where the pain science has sort of been pointing us. So I guess it seems to me like the book, that's a long-winded intro, the book that you're just putting out is Yoga and Science in Pain Care.
Right.
And it seems like, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of the intent of the book is to really try to bridge the science and the yoga some and the medical industry some.
Yes.
Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we really hope that the medical people will learn more about yoga by reading the book, and that the yoga people will learn more about the science. And sort of one of our big hopes around the book is that the yoga people will, by learning more about science, they'll recognize that the systems within yoga are validated. Not completely, but that what we do in yoga makes sense from a Western medical view. Actually, I'm not really saying that really well. It's almost like if you learn more about science, you can get your shit out of the way and actually do yoga.
Well, I guess that's true for some people. I know for me, getting my intellect out of the way often helps me feel things more. So I relate to that, but I don't know that everybody needs to feed their brain science before they can get to it. But I know what you mean.
Oh, yeah. Well, I totally agree. I think what people actually need to do is actually sort of listen into themselves. Right. I think that the contemplative practices, that aspect of yoga, is way, way more important. But we have been taught, there's this within the yoga therapy world right now, there seems to be this message of if it's not validated by science, it's not real. Rather than saying, no, we can learn stuff from science, but we can learn stuff through looking inside. That's the whole point. That makes sense?
It does make sense. But again, that doesn't seem to me to be the prevailing view in like a Western scientific medical community sense, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I was just at the Canadian Pain Society meeting, right? So most big countries in the world have their own pain society. And anyway, so the Canadian Pain Society meeting just happened a while ago, and it's mostly it's not even clinical researchers that were mostly there at this one. It was much more people in biochemistry and genetics, and all these people would get up and they'd do these really cool research studies, mostly with things like mice and other animals, and they'd sort of at the end they'd say, so because we've learned this about the experience of chronic pain, this thing that's happening inside the body, we realized so we could use this as a target for treatment. And of course, when they're saying target for treatment, what they're talking about is how could we put a drug in there, or what could we do? Much more from the medical model or the pharmaceutical model of fixing this, so that would positively change pain. And of course, every one of them, at the end of the presentation, there's a chance to ask questions. And so I decided that every time I heard someone say this, I'd stand up and ask them if they knew if there are any sort of human experiential behavioral things that would actually target that thing that they say needed to be changed. Because it's so odd is that so many of these researchers, when posed with that question, they sort of have this pause and don't really understand. Their view is we need to change this thing inside the body by putting something in the body, rather than could we get the person to do an asana practice? Could we get the person to do a pranayama? Could we get the person to do an awareness technique in meditation? And were any of those things? Or could we get the person to get back to find their faith again or find their purpose in life again? If we did that, would it change that target?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I mean, I guess that sort of fits in with, I'm saying that because it fits in with what you were saying, right, is that the common belief is it's just biochemistry stuff more than anything.
Well, I've been really looking at this from all kinds of different angles. Even more recently, I just had Peter Blackaby and Bernie Clark on at the same time, and we were even just talking about, well, can you target tissues to change posture? Like trying to really kind of, and sometimes these ideas that we have of the body as kind of a machine that can be tuned up.
Right.
I think it gets expressed a lot. It's subtle. It gets expressed a lot in language. And I was noting to myself at the beginning of the book that you all took care to explain why you were using certain language. In particular, choosing to say pain care instead of pain management.
Right.
What was the thinking for you guys behind that choice?
Well, there's sort of, I guess, two parts of it. Pain management really sounds like everything you're doing is to try to change the pain, right? That's what the whole point is, right? That everything is focused on the pain. But there's something about pain care that doesn't have that. It has this sound of having to do with life and with health, rather than something that you need to manage. But then the other idea is that pain management, it really sounds like the Western bit of, bad tissue, fix it, right? I think that, that's great. The thing that Matthew said, this idea is that there's this thing that we need to, this thing inside you that we need to manage, rather than the fact is, pain care, we hoped would get more towards a humanistic view. Sort of like the terminology of, yoga for low back pain. We would say it was, we actually should be talking about yoga for people who have low back pain.
Yes.
Right. And we're trying to find language that brought the person back in, and even in terms of Lorimer Moseley's work and the sort of popular neuroscience of today that talks about how that pain is a product of the brain, and so there are people who will contest that. But one of the things that Lorimer, I was talking to him probably about a month and a half ago about this, and he was saying, he sort of evolved into talking about pain's actually a product of the human. And then he said that, but sometimes what he needs to actually say is pain's a product of the integrated human, so that people understand that he doesn't think pain stops at the limit of a person's physical body, right? Because environments and community and everything else affects the person still. But it's really interesting is sort of that language, right? Is people have heard pain's a product of the brain. And so everything now gets attributed to the brain, which sort of takes, some people would say, actually takes the person out of it, right? As if it's as if there is no person in there. That
right, you don't have a brain without a person,
right?
In the same way that you don't have a pose without a person,
right?
And of course, you don't have a pathology without a person.
Exactly right. Yeah, and so you see, which I find really, really interesting is the longer. It seems that the longer that people get involved in the sciences that relate to humans, that they really start to learn, they start to become more philosophers. Mm-hmm. Or we do.
Well, I'm glad that we came to this when we talked 3 years ago, and every time I've talked to somebody who's more sort of science oriented, there's a point at which the conversation where I'm asking them questions about science where it inevitably gets mystical. And I always point it out to them, and then they acknowledge it for a moment, but it's it's not something that people usually directly go to, which it does seem like you guys are in the book some, which is very cool. And when you do that, though, going back to this distinction between care and management, it does matter. Like the response to pain, right? So is the response to have care towards it? Or is it to see it as something that needs to be managed? Those are very different. Those feel very different to me.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's so... an anesthesiologist that I worked with a lot, and he's a pain doc now. He actually, in 1984, was on chairlift, going up Whistler, and the chairlift broke, and he was one of the people who got a spinal cord injury that day, so he's paraplegic. And it's really fascinating talking to this guy. So he was in his last year of residency to be an anesthesiologist, and this happens to him. And he says, there was this machine that turned on when he had the spinal cord injury that took care of him and showed him how to, you've got a spinal cord injury, and we're going to, address it medically, but we're also going to get you back to life, right? This thing it does not need to define everything about you. And he said, but then when he developed neuropathic pain related to the spinal cord injury, there was no machine and there was no language, and people didn't, he said people took a totally different approach, right? He said it's like if you have a spinal cord injury, nobody would let you give up. Somebody, or possibly everybody, would work together to find a way to basically kick you in the ass to get you back to living again. He says, but when you have chronic pain, there's nothing like that. There's not even the language of hope, right? So it's so pervasive of like you've got this pain problem, and we don't have a language to talk about it, and we don't have really great care, right? Because if we went back to the spinal cord injury, the management stuff would have been the stuff that happened in the medical system, but then he needed to get back to life. And around the in the pain management world, that sort of hasn't happened yet. How do we help the person after medical care isn't going to do anything anymore?
Well, that's why you guys also talked about choosing to say assisting the person in pain rather than treating the person in pain.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But you chose to sometimes use it because you wanted to capture the attention of healthcare professionals who are accustomed to those terms. So you're navigating a line, right? See, that's the line that I'm kind of interested, that line that you're navigating right there, where you know that the language that the professionals are accustomed to is lacking in certain regards or is colored by biases.
Right. Yeah. And I think we haven't really paid enough attention to those. I mean, we all have them, and until we start talking about it more, we don't even notice the often the implicit narrative of what we're saying. I was at Kripalu a year and a half ago now. There was a pain and yoga and medicine conference, and it was really awesome. There was this really, really great mindfulness teacher there, Jill Satterfield. She's out in California. Anyway, she had this chronic abdominal pain that nobody could figure out what to do with, and really out of desperation, she turned to Vipassana and finally got some relief, and then actually did, I think, a whole bunch of 10-day retreats back to back. And so she's in front of everyone there, and she's talking about how she really doesn't have pain anymore. It's it's like with all this work over all these years, and this pain that was there and was debilitating is pretty much gone. But then she starts to talk about the idea of the two arrows. The Buddhist idea of, I can't even tell you for sure if it's a Buddhist idea, but the idea of the first arrow is the pain, and the second arrow is how the response to it. And the idea that our job is to work on the second arrow. And I said to her, it's really interesting to me because the narrative I hear in that is that you can't do anything about pain. You can only change how the pain has changed you, but you can't change the pain. Mm-hmm. And so I said to her, but you did, right? The practices that you're talking about, you're saying it didn't just change you're not. Sorry, I was saying to something like you're not saying I still have pain, but it doesn't affect me so much in life anymore. You're actually saying that the pain stopped, but the narrative of, or the implicit narrative of the two arrow idea is that you don't try to change the pain. You only change how you're suffering.
Right. There's nothing you can do about the pain. It's just you can alter your perception of the pain, and that will change it. But you're saying, but the changing of the perception changes the pain, changes the physiology.
Well, it should, but we also know that, we're pretty curious beings and that expectations sort of drive something.
Yeah.
So if you were to tell someone, when you do this treatment, this is what you should expect. And if the person believed you, it's possible that it would only change the one part of it because you have no belief, no conceptual framework that you could change the other.
Right. See, that's why the word treatment is problematic in and of itself. It kind of sets up a mind frame for somebody. I'm going to be treated, as opposed to this person's going to assist me, meaning that you're going to do it. Right?
Well, that's another important part of it, right? Is that the best care is the stuff. The things that we do that give the best long-term outcome is the stuff that we do. Yeah. Other people can help us with that, but that's it's another piece of this is that there's a real reluctance to make it absolutely clear that what the individual is able to do is really, really important for the long-term outcome. Because no one wants to blame, right? Because it sounds like you're blaming the person in pain. Or that can happen as the person can think. If I'm saying to you, the best way to get this better is for me to help you with breathing practices and awareness practices and movement practices, right? It's what you do that's going to give the best effect. Sometimes the message or the narrative that's heard there is that, well, you're saying it's all my fault and it's all my responsibility.
Well, we're not saying it's your fault, but I could guess how someone could get that narrative. But I also, it seems to me everybody I've talked to acknowledges that ultimately it's a built-in inherent part of us is that the healing comes from. Like that the system that we're inhabiting, this body, it has its own inherent healing mechanism. I think we talked about that 3 years ago.
Probably, yeah.
And in a way, this idea that you're assisting someone rather than treating them is acknowledging that. It's putting full agency to where the healing actually happens.
Yes, and recognizing that one of our big job on the other side is to give the person what they need to be able to succeed with that. So I got this really cool idea I'll throw by is this idea of therapeutic alliance. So actually, two terms. So there's therapeutic alliance. The other term is about self-management techniques, right? Which we try to call in the book self-care techniques. Anyway, so there's this growing acceptance in the medical pain world that self-management techniques are vital to a person's long-term recovery, which I know that sounds sort of weird that there's a growing acceptance, but there is. But in part of that acceptance is that there's this, the narrative there is that if you've got chronic pain, my job is to teach you these self-management techniques, and you should be able to learn them, and you should be able to do them and get positive effect. And missing the point that there are some people who will not be able to learn these without extensive guidance and practice and coaching. And there are some people in the world who possibly will never be able to learn how to do them until you get a different kind of therapeutic alliance, until you get closer to them, until the person like fully trusts you and sees you, completely on their side, and it probably gets to the point where you actually have a relationship that you would say is that there's a certain amount of compassion and possibly even a loving connection, a loving caring for another person, and that in that place the person might finally be able to learn self-management techniques, because that may be what the person needed to actually feel safe enough to be able to engage in them. And then one more step is that sometimes you can step back from that person and the person says, now I get it, now I can do it, and I can get some success. But then there are other people who may never, ever be able to actually self-regulate effectively on their own. That this person in front of us may always need to be in a safe community for it to actually work. But in the pain self-management side of things, self-management tech side of things, technique side of things, we're really not talking about that yet. But I think the people who are really good in pain, in Western pain management, and the people who are good in yoga therapy probably do it and aren't even thinking about it. Did that make sense?
I'm not sure. So wait a second. So are you saying that there's some people who aren't ever going to just be able to do it on their own? They're going to always need help? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh. But I would like to think that it's possible that person can do it on their own, right?
Right.
And that's the way take the possibility away from them.
Totally. We would not. But what we need to do is recognize that this individual's unique life experience may have set them up that
it's not going to happen this time around.
Well, right. Well, maybe it's the social engagement piece, right?
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.